Boston, early December. The city glowed beneath ribbons of Christmas lights, but the cold cut through skin like shards of glass. Sophie Lawson pulled her coat collar tighter, trembling hands clutching a cheap cup of steaming coffee, the bitter scent of caffeine mixed with the wind. She inhaled deeply and told herself just 6 more months. 6 more months until graduation. 6 more months until she and Lila could leave the rundown apartment in South Boston, where neighbors' late-night arguments blended with the distant rumble of trains, and fear slept quietly under every blanket. Her wrist throbbed faintly beneath the thick layer of concealer, hiding the violet bruises. She had learned to paint her face like an artist, only to hide the truth. Tyler, her ex-boyfriend, once had warm eyes and promises as wide as the sky. Now all he had left were soft-spoken threats, sharp as blades. "If you leave, you'll regret it." She had believed him. She had gone back 3 times. The fourth, all she had left, was silence. Verona's, a restaurant in downtown Boston, shimmered with warm golden lights spilling onto the cobblestone street. A slice of Italy elegant buzzing with soft jazz and the scent of red wine. Sophie worked the evening shift there long nights until midnight, where forced smiles were paid for with tips and sometimes unwanted stares. Tonight, she nearly stumbled during her first round. Her hands shook as she carried a tray of glasses, the collar of her shirt, choking her like a reminder of what she was hiding. Marco, the Italian manager, muttered as he passed by Smile Sophie. "People don't pay to see sadness." She forced a smile. And then he walked in. Ryan Cooper, a man whose very presence shifted the air as if the whole restaurant held its breath when he passed. Dark gray suit, perfectly tailored. Shirt collar slightly open, revealing a thin silver chain catching the light. Black hair slicked back, calm face, and eyes brown. Deep, unreadable, so piercing that Sophie instinctively lowered her gaze when they met hers. Ryan sat at table 9, the VIP section. 3 men accompanied him, silent, watchful. She didn't need an introduction to know what kind of man he was, polite on the surface, but with an undercurrent of quiet power. She brought over their drinks, steady voice masking the tremor beneath. "Imported Italian spring water, gentlemen." Ryan looked at her. His gaze brushed over her like a warm blade, not invasive, yet impossible to ignore. "Thank you," he said, his voice low, slightly hoarse. The tone of a man used to commanding, not asking. As she set the glass down, her sleeve slipped just enough to reveal a faint yellow bruise along her wrist. Just a second, but it was enough for his eyes to stop. Not to look. To read. Sophie pulled her sleeve back quickly, her heart pounding. I dropped a tray yesterday. It's nothing." "I didn't ask," he said quietly, voice just low enough for her alone. "But some things aren't meant to be hidden." The words pierced her like a pin through silk. She turned away, forcing herself to breathe. Who was he? And why did a single look from him feel like he had stripped away every layer of her fear? When her shift ended, a light drizzle misted over the city. Sophie cleared the last table and noticed a small envelope tucked beneath a glass at table 9. Inside, $400 in cash, and a single line written in neat handwriting. "If you ever need someone to clean up your past, don't be afraid to call." A phone number followed below. She froze. Amid the hum of jazz still playing in the background, her heartbeat thundered like a drum. That was not the kind of invitation a girl like her should ever receive. Yet when she slipped the note into her wallet, her hands trembled not from fear, but from being seen. The next morning, Sophie woke late. The small apartment was quiet except for the ticking clock and the faint smell of weak coffee. Lila. Her younger sister sat at the table, earbuds in, studying with pop music playing softly. "You got home late again." "Did Tyler call?" Lila asked, worry in her voice. "No, he won't be calling anymore," Sophie said, and only then realized she didn't quite believe it herself. When Lila left for school, Sophie's phone buzzed on the table. A text from an unknown number. "Don't worry, he won't touch you again. No name, no explanation. Just that single line, cold, certain, final." Her pulse quickened. Someone knew about Tyler. Ryan or someone else. That evening, police showed up at the restaurant. Tyler Brooks missing for 24 hours. His car had been found under the Zakim Bridge doors, open keys still in the ignition. No witnesses, no camera footage. She told the truth. He came to my place Friday night drunk. I didn't let him in. The officers left, but their eyes lingered, searching, suspicious. Sophie sat on the restaurant's back steps, rain falling cold and steady. Ryan's words echoed in her head. Some things aren't meant to be hidden. She wondered if hiding ever truly saved anyone, or only delayed what fate had already written. That night, Ryan came back, but not to the VIP area. He sat by the window where the glow of streetlights shimmered on the glass. She approached, pulse racing. What would you like tonight? A glass of red? The one you prefer. I don't drink. That's fine. But someone who hides bruises that well must know which wine burns fear away. Her breath caught. It wasn't flirtation. It was revelation. She wanted to ask, "Who are you? Why do you know so much?" But Ryan only looked outside where the first snowflakes of the season drifted through the rain. Some people disappear so others can live. Some show up only to remind us. Life isn't always cruel, he murmured, standing up and leaving a second envelope behind. This time, no money, only a single white rose wrapped in silk paper. And a note, "You deserve the light you've forgotten you carry." That night, Sophie sat by her apartment window, the white rose in her hand. Outside, the snow melted into the pavement, glowing faintly under the streetlight. In that fragile moment, she knew her life was shifting towards something irreversible, where the man named Ryan Cooper wouldn't just be the one who saw her wounds, but perhaps the one who would leave another deeper, impossible to regret. She didn't know that across the city, a man stood in a dark room, phone in hand, his low voice cutting through the silence. It's done. Make sure no one ever finds him. Outside, the snow thickened, and for the first time in months, Boston was terrifyingly quiet. If you felt the trembling, the mystery, and the fragile light within this story, follow the channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories find their way into more hearts. The Boston rain hadn't stopped. Droplets streamed endlessly down the glass windows of Verona's, as if the city itself were trying to hide something. Sophie stood behind the bar, her hands trembling slightly as she polished a wine glass. The humid air fogged the mirror, reflecting the image of a girl who looked calmer and stronger than she felt. 3 days had passed since Tyler vanished. The news said his car was found near the harbor doors, locked, no signs of struggle. The police came with questions the neighbors whispered in corners, and Sophie felt like she was living inside a dream that smelled of rust and rain. She didn't know whether to be afraid or relieved. No more banging on the door at midnight. No more threatening texts. But the silence. It was too deep, too unnatural. Marco called out from the kitchen. "Table 6 has been waiting too long, Sophie." "Yes, I'm on it," she replied. She set the tray down, adjusted her smile, and walked through the sound of laughter and expensive perfume. The world kept spinning as if nothing had changed. No one knew that inside her, everything was trembling like glass about to crack. Table 6 was a group of young businessmen, dark suits the scent of cologne mixed with strong liquor. Sophie placed the pasta plates carefully and gave a polite nod. One of the men stared too long, and for a second her wrist throbbed again, the memory of a violent grip flashing behind her eyes. She inhaled sharply and stepped back. And then, as she turned toward the bar, he was there. Ryan Cooper sitting in the same spot by the window, the streetlight's reflection sculpting his face in shadows. He hadn't asked for any other server. He was waiting for her. Sophie hesitated, her heart racing against reason. "The same order as last time?" she asked quietly, steadying her voice. Ryan tilted his head slightly. "I think you already know my taste." The simple sentence in his low voice thickened the air between them like red wine. She turned away, but she could still feel his gaze following her steady unreadable. Part of her wanted to flee. Another part couldn't. Like a moth aware of the fire, but drawn all the same. When she brought his drink, Ryan rested his hand on the edge of the table, his fingers brushing her wrist. A light, polite touch, yet it froze her in place. "You haven't been sleeping," he said. "I don't know what you mean." "Your eyes do." He leaned in slightly, voice low enough for only her. "And people don't sleep when they know something in the dark has changed their life forever." She pulled back, startled. "What are you implying?" Ryan looked directly at her. No mockery, only depth. "I'm asking whether you're afraid of the dark, or of what lives inside it." Sophie said nothing. She turned away, forcing herself to focus on work, though her mind tangled like a thread wound too tight around her fingers. That night near midnight, her shift ended. Marco let her leave early, few customers, steady rain. The wind outside cut through her coat. Streetlights flickered across puddles, painting broken ribbons of gold on the wet pavement. She wrapped her scarf tighter, walking briskly through the narrow alley, leading to the bus stop. Then came a sound behind her footsteps, splashing through water. Sophie froze, her heart hammering. "Hello," she whispered. No reply, only mist and the faint buzz of a dying street lamp. She walked faster. The sound followed, heavy, deliberate, like someone wanted her to know. "Who's there?" Her voice trembled. Silence. Then from the shadows, a figure emerged, thin face, bloodshot eyes. Tyler. Her breath caught. "Oh, God, you?" "Surprised, sweetheart." His voice was hoarse, slurred with drink. "You thought you got away. You disappeared. The police are looking?" Tyler laughed, a low, broken sound. "Yeah, I've been looking too. But I think I found something else first." He staggered closer, reeking of whiskey. She backed up until her spine hit the brick wall. "Don't come closer," she said, voice shaking. "Who are you talking to?" he sneered. "The man who fed you, paid your rent. You think I don't know who's helping you now?" "Huh, that rich bastard, who is he?" Sophie struggled, twisting against his grip. "Let me go." Tyler's grin turned feral. "You know I was going to let you go. But then I saw the way he looked at you in Verona's. I get it now. You're sleeping with him, aren't you?" A sharp cracking sound split the air. Tyler froze, eyes wide. A shadow moved behind him, a tall figure coat soaked in rain. "Ryan." He grabbed Tyler by the collar, voice low and deadly calm. "You should have learned how to disappear properly." Tyler struggled, cursing, but Ryan moved with precision, his hand twisting his body, turning one clean, brutal strike. Tyler crumpled to the ground. Sophie stood frozen, her hand covering her mouth. Ryan said something quietly. She couldn't tell if it was to her or someone else. "Take him." Two men stepped from the darkness. Without a glance at her, they hauled Tyler away, their footsteps swallowed by the rain. His hoarse shouts faded into nothing. When silence fell, only she and Ryan remained in the alley, soaked and trembling. He turned toward her, his eyes glinting not with anger, but with something darker. Calculation. Pain. What did you do?" Sophie whispered. "What needed to be done?" "Did you kill him?" "No." His gaze didn't waver. "But he'll never have the chance to frighten you again. You had no right, and he had no right to hit you." His tone sharpened. "You think the law protects you?" "Where was it for the last 6 months?" She couldn't answer. Ryan's expression softened slightly. He took off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. "You're shaking." "Because of you," she said. Honest, surprised by her own words. He paused. For a heartbeat, he almost smiled. "I'll take you home, I can—" "No," he interrupted quietly. "Tonight you shouldn't be alone." His black car waited at the end of the street. Inside, the air smelled of leather and faint smoke. Sophie sat in silence, watching the city lights flicker across the glass like pulse beats. Ryan drove steadily, saying nothing. Only when they stopped outside her apartment did he turn to her. "I know you're afraid of me," he said. "But fear isn't always bad. Fear keeps people alive. You want me to thank you for that, no?" He gave a faint smile. "I don't need gratitude. Just for you to understand some things can't be done halfway. When you looked my way that night, you stepped into a world where turning back isn't an option." She didn't fully grasp his meaning, but something in his eyes told her that for all his darkness, he might be the only one strong enough to keep hers at bay. He opened the door for her. "Get some rest. I'll have someone watch the area. I don't need protection." "Maybe not, but I do." His gaze softened. Sometimes protecting someone is the only way to keep from becoming a monster completely. His words left her speechless. She stood under the awning, watching his car fade into the rain. Boston glimmered beneath the streetlights, and in her chest, something small flickered weak but warm, thawing the fear that had frozen her for months. For the first time, she didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified of the man who had saved her from a nightmare with the hands of the devil himself. And in the car driving back through the storm, Ethan, the gray-haired man in the back seat, spoke quietly. "Should we finish it, Mr. Cooper?" Ryan leaned back, watching the rain streak down the glass. His voice was low, distant as thunder. "Numb. We don't kill cowards, but make sure he understands if he's still breathing. It's because I allow it." Boston was colder than usual that night, but in a small apartment window, a girl sat beside a wilting white rose and wondered, in this world, could savior and danger really be just two sides of the same coin? Boston was eerily quiet after the storm. The rain had stopped, leaving thin rivulets glistening on the streets, reflecting the pale yellow glow of the streetlights. Sophie stood by the window of her small apartment, gazing down at the empty road. Her hands unconsciously tightened around a steaming cup of tea. The scent of ginger filled the air, warm, soothing, but not enough to chase away the cold inside her chest. She never thought she could tremble because of a man, not from fear, but from something she couldn't name, a blend of gratitude and unease. Ryan Cooper had saved her life, but the way he had appeared at the exact moment in the exact place left her questioning whether it had been coincidence, or if he had been watching her all along. The next morning, Boston was shrouded in fog. On her way to the hospital for training, Sophie picked up a morning paper. A small headline buried on the back page caught her eye. Tyler Brooks, 29, reported missing. Police continue investigation. No photo, no details. Just a few cold, indifferent lines. She read them over and over, finding no trace of that night of the moment Ryan had made a man vanish as if he had never existed. At the hospital, while changing a patient's bandage, her hands trembled slightly. The supervising doctor noticed. "You all right, Lawson?" "Yes, sir. Just a bit of lost sleep. This job doesn't only heal others. You know," he said softly, "you have to learn how to heal yourself, too." The words were simple, but they struck the deepest part of her mind. That evening, Sophie returned to Verona's. Marco scolded her for being 10 minutes late, but fell silent when he saw the familiar man sitting by the window. Ryan. He was reading the menu, though it was clear he wasn't really looking at the words. His gaze drifted through the glass toward the misty city beyond. Sophie approached with a tray. "Will you have the same wine tonight?" "Not tonight." "Coffee, black." His voice was low, calm, like dawn fog. As she turned to leave, he added, "You shouldn't have come to work today." She froze. "What do you mean you've been followed for 2 days?" A silver sedan plate switched. Her breath caught. "You've been watching me. I've been protecting you. There's a difference. I don't need protection." Ryan's eyes met hers, slow, deep, unflinching. "Everyone who's ever said that ended up needing it." Sophie said nothing. For a long second, the restaurant felt utterly still, the air filled with something unspoken, fragile, dangerous. Ryan reached into his coat and placed a small card on the table. "This is Ethan's number. If anything feels wrong, call him. He works for me." Sophie glanced down. The card was blank, no logo, no title, only a phone number. "You think I'm in danger?" "I don't think." "I know." That night, when she left the restaurant, Ryan was still there, eyes following her through the fog until her figure disappeared. He picked up his phone and spoke quietly like a command. "Ethan, she's being followed. Clean it up within 24 hours. Leave nothing behind." The voice on the other end said nothing, just the kind of silence that meant complete understanding. 3 days later, the silver car was gone. No news, no trace. Marco mentioned that some well-dressed men had come asking about Sophie, polite but unsettlingly so. That evening, Ryan appeared again. He didn't order. He just sat as though his presence alone was enough to keep trouble away. When Sophie brought his water, he asked, "Have you ever thought about leaving Boston?" "I have a sister. I can't leave her. I can take care of both of you." Sophie looked at him, the warm light brushing over his composed face. "Why do you care about me?" Ryan was silent for a long moment. Because when I saw those bruises, he said softly, I remembered my mother. Your mother. He nodded slowly. When I was little, His voice tightened, beat her until she was unrecognizable. And she stayed. She thought love was strong enough to change a monster. Sophie exhaled, her eyes glistening. She's still alive, yes, but only her body. The rest of her died long ago. A long silence stretched between them. She finally understood why he had looked at her the way he did that night, not with pity, but with recognition. I'm sorry, she whispered, for making you remember. Ryan shook his head. No. You reminded me that some people are still worth protecting. The words were gentle, but they cut straight to her heart. She turned away, and yet something inside her broke and healed at the same time. Later that night, as she prepared to leave, Marco approached her quietly. Be careful with your friend Sophie, he murmured. They say Cooper's the kind of man the law doesn't touch. Marco, you've been watching too many movies. I'm serious. Half this restaurant belongs to him. No one asks who owns the other half. Sophie went still. So that was why the stairs, the quiet, respect the way people parted when he entered. On her walk home, she noticed a familiar black car parked across the street. Ryan stepped out, white shirt, dark coat draped over his shoulders. He didn't say a word, just opened the passenger door, his eyes asking, Will you come? After a moment's hesitation, Sophie walked toward him. The car glided off, slipping through the fog like a shadow. I don't understand, she said. You save me, protect me, watch me. Why is it pity? No, Ryan replied, eyes on the road. Because you make me want to be better. Even if it's only once in my life. She said nothing. The words sank deep, leaving a quiet ache in her chest. They stopped at a deserted harbor where waves lapped softly against the stone pier. The night was silent except for the wind. Ryan stepped out, staring at the black surface of the water. This place was where it all started, he said quietly. Here I learned that power doesn't come from a gun, it comes from silence. And now you're talking to me because I don't want to stay silent anymore. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. His eyes no longer carried the coldness of that rainy night. They held something else, something torn between guilt and the longing for redemption. I don't even know who you are, she said softly. But every time you show up, I feel like I'm stepping deeper into a world I'll never be strong enough to escape. Ryan smiled faintly, a rare, wistful smile. You don't have to escape. Just know what's real. He handed her a small, old silver box. Call it a guarantee. If one day everything around you falls apart, open this. What's inside the truth? But don't open it until you're ready. She took the box, her heart heavy with questions. They stood there in the dark and the smell of salt. Two strangers bound by what neither could name. When Ryan turned away, the wind lifted his coat slightly, revealing a long scar on his wrist. The mark of a man who once tried to cut away his past, but never escaped it. On her way home, Sophie's phone buzzed. A text. Unknown number. Don't believe everything he says. Half of it is true. The other half is what he wants you to believe. She froze, the streetlight casting pale gold across her face. Far ahead, Ryan's black car stopped briefly at an intersection, its red taillights glowing like the period at the end of a sentence that wasn't quite finished. Morning settled over Boston in a silver haze, a soft mist that wrapped the city like it was caught inside a memory. Sophie poured coffee for Lila, trying to act normal, but her mind was tangled like a broken thread. Ever since that night at the harbor, she hadn't opened the silver box Ryan had given her. Every time her fingers brushed against it, her palm went cold, as if what it held wasn't just the truth, but a doorway to a place from which there would be no return. Lila ate breakfast while eyeing her sister curiously. Something's wrong, isn't it? No, just tired. Tired because of someone. Sophie froze. Lila smiled teasingly. You've been spacing out lately, like you're thinking about someone. Sophie avoided her gaze. She was afraid to say his name. Because the moment she did, even the air around her might change heavier, deeper, like admitting something too dangerous to take back. That afternoon, the call came. A deep, professional male voice, Ms. Lawson. "This is St. Mary's Hospital. Your sister Lila Lawson is here." The coffee cup slipped from her hand and shattered across the floor. By the time she reached the hospital, Lila's head was bandaged. The wound was small, but the fear in her eyes wasn't. "A car almost hit me," Lila whispered, trembling. "But I think it was on purpose." Sophie sank into a chair, her chest tightening like a fist around her heart. "Did you see the plate number? No." "But there was a man. He pulled me away just in time. Took me here, then disappeared." Sophie asked the nurses, the doctor. No one remembered more than a tall figure in a black coat, hood pulled low. One name came to her mind instinctively: Ryan. That evening when she came home, the apartment door was ajar. A chill ran up her spine. She froze, gripping her keys like a weapon. "You should change the locks," a deep voice said from the shadows. Ryan sat calmly in her living room, golden light spilling across half his face. He looked completely at ease, as though this were his home. "What are you doing here?" Her voice trembled. "Getting here before someone else does." "What do you mean someone wanted to send you a message?" "They went for your sister first." Sophie's breath caught. Ryan stood, his tone low but steady. "I told Ethan to keep watch. If he hadn't been there, Lila wouldn't be alive." "So you were having us followed?" "If following means keeping you alive, then yes." She stepped back, anger and fear colliding. "I don't need you to save me, don't you?" Ryan's voice hardened low as a blade drawn across glass. "Without me, Tyler would have killed you. Without me, Lila would be on an operating table right now." "Say it again, Sophie. Do you really not need me?" She said nothing. Every word from him struck straight at her weakness. Ryan's gaze softened. "I know you hate the feeling of being dependent. But sometimes," he said quietly, "survival is its own form of defiance." He turned away, his voice steady again. "You'll move out. Tonight. I'm not going anywhere. You don't have a choice. You can't decide my life." Ryan stopped, turned, stepped closer, close enough that she could feel his breath. "I don't want to have that power," he said softly. "But when you became my weakness, everything changed." The air froze between them. Sophie stood still, her skin prickling under the faint warmth of his breath, the scent of mint and smoke wrapping around her, terrifying, intoxicating, impossible to escape. That night, they left Boston. Ethan drove. Ryan sat in the front passenger seat. Sophie and Lila sat in the back. The SUV cut through the highway, swallowed by the dense black night. The city receded behind them like an unfinished dream. "Where are we going?" Sophie asked. "Maine, somewhere safe." "Your place, a place that used to be mine. Now it belongs to someone else." Lila glanced into the rearview mirror. "Who are you?" "Really?" Ryan gave a faint, humorless smile. Someone who once thought he could buy peace with money. No one spoke again. The hum of the tires and the whistling wind filled the silence. Sophie sat still, the rhythm of her heartbeat blending with the road beneath them, an endless, uncertain lullaby. The cabin appeared after 7 hours on the road, a small wooden house nestled among pine trees. Dawn had just broken. Mist drifted across a lake so calm that even the faint ripples of fish could be heard. "This will be your place," Ryan said, opening the door. "Supplies will arrive by noon." The cabin was small but warm. Pale wood walls, a large window overlooking the lake, and a faint fire crackling in the hearth. Sophie stepped inside. The scent of pine and fresh coffee filled the air, wrapping her in a fragile calm. Lila ran from room to room, wide-eyed. "It's beautiful, like something out of a movie." Ryan smiled faintly. "This was my mother's refuge. When she left my father, it was the only place she could breathe." "And now you brought me here," Sophie said quietly. "So I can learn how to breathe too," "No," he replied. "I brought you here to remember that sometimes running isn't weakness. It's the first step toward freedom." She wanted to answer, but words tangled in her throat. Anger, gratitude, fear, all blurred into something nameless. Later that afternoon, Ryan stood on the porch. Golden sunlight slanting across his shoulders. Sophie brought him a cup of coffee and set it down on the wooden table. "How long will you stay until you feel safe?" "And after that?" "After that, I'll probably disappear. Like everything else in my life. She pressed her lips together. You always talk like nothing can ever hold you, because nothing ever has. She looked up at him. Not even me. Ryan smiled faintly. The sunlight glinted in his brown eyes, turning them to amber. You're the one exception I don't want to admit. She fell silent. The breeze carried the scent of pine. A bird took flight over the lake wings, slicing the quiet air. Ryan reached out, brushed her hand lightly, saying nothing. Sophie didn't pull away. In that fragile moment, every wall she had built began to fall. That night, she saw light seeping from under his study door. Through the crack, she saw Ryan standing by a desk, staring at an old photograph, a young woman with sorrowful eyes and a small boy at her side. Sophie stepped quietly into the doorway. Your mother. He nodded, his voice rough. She endured more than anyone should. I swore I'd never let another woman live like that. You can't save everyone, Ryan. No, he said, turning to her. His gaze held hers unflinching. But I can start by not losing you. Her breath caught not because of what he said, but because of how he said it slowly, with a weight that came from somewhere deeper than words. The night in Maine was so still she could hear leaves falling. Sophie sat on the porch, gazing across the moonlit lake. The water shimmered like glass, reflecting her and Ryan's silhouettes side by side, close but not touching. She knew her life had changed since that rainy night in Boston. And now, beside this man, the lines between right and wrong, love and fear had begun to blur like steam rising from a morning cup of coffee. But somewhere far away in the sleeping city of Boston, a man sat before a computer screen, watching live footage of Ryan and Sophie by the lake. He tapped his fingers against the desk and smiled thinly. So, I've finally found your weakness, Cooper. Maine, late December, the first snowflakes of the season drifted down over the lake, melting slowly, as if they too feared breaking the fragile peace of this place. The cabin in the pine forest glowed softly under the light of the fireplace. Everything seemed calm, yet it was the kind of calm that came before a storm. Sophie woke early. She brewed coffee. The rich aroma filled the kitchen, warm and familiar, pulling her thoughts back to mornings in Boston, when she used to hide bruises under her sleeves before rushing to her shift at Verona's. Now, instead of traffic and sirens, she heard the whisper of wind through pine branches and the faint creak of the cabin breathing in the cold. She thought she'd found peace. But sometimes silence itself becomes the thing you fear most. Ryan entered wearing a black sweater, his hair tousled. He picked up the cup she had just poured, took a sip, and smiled faintly. You're finally learning how I like it. I've been watching you for 2 weeks, she said lightly. It wasn't hard to figure out. 2 weeks? He raised an eyebrow, his voice tinged with humor. I thought you were counting the days until you could leave. Sophie gave a small laugh, then fell quiet. She couldn't lie. She had thought about leaving. But every time she saw him, this man who carried darkness in his eyes, but still cooked her dinner. Every night she felt something she couldn't name. That afternoon, Ethan arrived bringing boxes of supplies. Calm as always, he spoke little, his gaze never lingering on anyone for long. But today, something was different. He glanced around before stepping inside and said quietly to Ryan, We've been traced. Ryan set his cup down, his eyes darkening. By who? Not sure. But someone accessed the surveillance system in Boston. They know she's alive. Sophie froze. Her voice trembled. Ryan turned to her, his tone softening. Don't worry, they don't know where we are yet. Who are they? A group I used to work with, he said, slowly choosing his words. They think they can use you to pull me back in. Sophie's breath hitched the floor, seeming to tilt beneath her. So all this is because of me? No, Ryan replied, his voice low, steady. Because of me? You're just the one person I can't let them touch. Ethan spoke up. I'll tighten security around the area, but we should prepare an exit plan. Ryan nodded. Sophie only stared at him. The man who'd promised to keep her safe, now standing on the razor's edge between protection and destruction. That night, after Lila had fallen asleep, Sophie stepped outside. Snow covered the ground in soft white layers. The moon broke in half behind the trees. Ryan sat on the steps, a glass of wine in his hand. The firelight flickered across his face, half in shadow, half in gold. "You should rest," he said without looking up. "What about you? I'm used to sleepless nights." She sat down beside him. "I used to think you helped me out of pity. And now I think maybe you're saving yourself through me." Ryan chuckled softly, his voice rough like wind scraping over stone. "Maybe you're right. We're all someone's scar." She turned toward him. "So what am I to you, your scar?" "No," he murmured. "You're the thing that reminds me I still have a heart." The silence between them grew thick-heavy with everything neither dared say. Sophie opened her mouth to speak, but her phone vibrated in her pocket. A message. Unknown number. "He's lying to you. Every woman who stayed in that cabin was promised safety. None of them ever left." Her blood ran cold. She looked up. Ryan was watching her, his gaze sharp, reading every flicker in her expression. "Who just texted you?" "No one." She hid the phone. "Don't lie to me, Sophie." His voice dropped lower, not loud, but it cut through her like ice. "I'm not. You don't trust me." The words fell between them like a crack splitting the ground. Sophie rose to her feet, stepping back. "I just want to know what you're hiding." "Everyone hides something," Ryan said quietly, his eyes on the black surface of the lake. "But I've never hidden that you matter to me." She turned away, hiding the tears burning her eyes. And he, the man who could control the world, stood helpless for the first time, unable to hold on to one woman's trust. That night, Sophie couldn't sleep. She lay awake staring at the ceiling. The message still glowed on her phone. No follow-up, no sender. She went to the window. Far off through the trees, she saw headlights flicker, then vanish. The next morning, snow fell thicker. Ethan reported grimly, "There are tire tracks around the perimeter." "They're not ours." Ryan's face went cold. "Pack the car, we're leaving tonight," Sophie protested. "No, I can't keep running forever." "You think I want to," Ryan snapped, bitterness sharp in his tone. "But this is the price for living in the dark." Then his voice softened. "When this is over, I'll let you go. I promise." Sophie gave a sad, tired laugh, freedom. "Do you even know what that means to me? It means not depending on anyone. Not letting someone else decide where I live or whether I live at all." Ryan stepped closer, his hand wrapping gently around her wrist, the same wrist that once carried bruises. "Then let me show you how to fight for it," he said quietly. "But you have to stay alive first." She pulled her hand free, but the pain that filled her chest was sharper than fear itself. That evening, as they packed, a gunshot echoed from the woods. Ethan bolted outside, weapon drawn. Lila screamed, and Sophie clutched her tightly. "Turn off the lights," Ryan ordered. Darkness swallowed the room. Only their quick, shallow breaths filled the air. 1 minute. 2. Silence. Ethan returned, his face grim. A deer was hit, but the bullet wasn't from a hunter. "It's 9mm mercenary issue." Ryan nodded once. "They've found us." He turned to Sophie. "Listen to me. Take Lila to the basement. Don't make a sound. No matter what happens, don't open that door. And you, I'll do what I do best." His eyes met hers, intense, steady, a silent vow. Sophie pulled Lila close and led her downstairs. The steel door shut behind them. The world above erupted, gunshots breaking glass-heavy footsteps. Then silence. Moments later, the door burst open. Ethan stood there, blood streaking his arm. "Go now." "Where's Ryan?" Sophie cried. "He's still up there. I'll go back for him." But before she could move, another figure appeared in the doorway. An unfamiliar man with a cold, expressionless face. "No need," he said flatly. "Cooper's no longer a problem." Sophie froze. Lila sobbed. Ethan fired, shouting for them to run. The night exploded into chaos. Gunfire, smoke, the acrid smell of powder mixing with snow. They ran until Sophie's lungs burned, until the forest opened onto a narrow road. Behind them, flames clawed into the sky. The cabin was burning bright, violent, beautiful, merciless. "Ryan? He's still in there?" Lila screamed. Sophie held her sister close, tears blurring her vision. The wind carried the taste of ash. Somewhere inside her, something broke wide open, a hollow space where hope and grief became one. She didn't know if Ryan Cooper was alive or dead, but she knew one thing from that moment on: her life had crossed into a new chapter where love and loss were no longer two separate things, but two sides of the same flame. 3 days after the explosion, snow blanketed the highway between Maine and New Hampshire, covering the last faint embers of that terrible night. Ethan's old pickup truck cut quietly through the thick fog, its engine humming like a tired heartbeat in the oppressive silence. In the back seat, Sophie held Lila close, her wide eyes hollow, unblinking. She couldn't remember how long she had been crying. All she knew was that since the moment the cabin went up in flames, something inside her had died. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ryan standing amidst the fire, his figure fading in the smoke, still turning back to look at her one last time. There had been no fear in his eyes, only a calm acceptance, as if he had always known this would be his end. She had lost him, or at least she believed she had. Ethan brought the sisters to another cabin, deep in the forests outside Vermont. It was smaller, rougher, but safe. "Stay here for now," he said, his voice steady, too steady. "I'll recheck our communication lines." "And Ryan?" Sophie asked, the name cutting through her like glass. Ethan was silent for a long time before replying. No one could have survived that explosion. The words pierced her chest. Sophie nodded faintly, forcing herself not to break in front of her sister. When Ethan left, Lila squeezed her hand. "Is he really gone?" Sophie shook her head, voice hoarse. "Don't ask, Lila. Sometimes believing someone's still alive is the only way to keep yourself alive, too." The days that followed blurred together. Sophie kept busy cleaning, lighting fires, cooking breakfast. She planted a few small flowers by the window, pretending life was normal. But each time the wind rustled through the pines, she turned sharply, expecting that familiar voice behind her. "You should drink your coffee black. No sugar." No one was there. Only the hollow silence that filled the room like frost. One night, Ethan returned with a small USB drive. He set it on the wooden table and slid it toward her. "This was all I could recover from Ryan's server," he said quietly. "He backed everything up before the explosion." "Everything?" Sophie asked. "What does that mean, files?" "Transactions. And one video." Sophie plugged it into her old laptop. The screen flickered to life, revealing Ryan's face sitting in that same cabin in Maine, the firelight reflecting in his eyes. "If you're watching this, it means I'm no longer with you. There's something I never told you, not to deceive you, but because I was afraid you'd walk away if you knew. I once worked with the organization behind the trafficking ring in Boston. When I found out they were killing the women I was trying to protect, I turned on them. Since then, I've been their target. You came into my life when I had no reason left to change. Somehow you made me believe I still could." He paused, his voice deepening. "Ethan knows the plan. If I don't make it back, go with him to the base in Montreal. There's a hard drive there. It holds everything. It's your only way out of this darkness. And Sophie, if there's another life after this one, I'd still want to find you somewhere without blood or fear." The screen went black. Sophie sat motionless, her hands trembling so violently that the USB slipped to the floor without her noticing. Lila sobbed quietly beside her. Ethan stood still, his expression shadowed a blend of grief, guilt, and something unspoken. The next morning, they left Vermont heading north. The road was slick with snow, but Ethan drove with unnerving precision. Sophie glanced at him from time to time. Since Ryan's death, he seemed changed, quieter, more withdrawn. "How long did you know Ryan?" she asked. 10 years. "Do you believe he's really gone?" Ethan didn't answer right away. "I've seen him survive things worse than death," he said finally. "If it were anyone else, I'd say no, but Ryan, I'm not sure." Sophie turned to the window, hiding the faint, trembling smile that crossed her lips. That evening, they stopped at a small roadside inn near the border. Sophie couldn't sleep. She went outside where snow drifted gently under the amber glow of a lamppost. The air smelled of pine and cold iron. A sound behind her, Ethan holding a cup of coffee. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "I keep thinking, if he were alive, he'd find me." If he wants you safe, Ethan said he might be doing the opposite, staying away so they never find you. Sophie looked at him, a faint, sad smile touching her lips. You sound a lot like him. Ethan took a sip, then after a pause said quietly, Maybe that's because I used to be him, or at least the version of him who hadn't yet learned how to love. She blinked, startled. But Ethan didn't look at her. His voice was steady, carried by the wind. Ryan never believed in love. Not until you. And that was the mistake that made him vulnerable. Sophie shook her head. Love isn't a mistake. For men like us. Ethan said, staring into the distance, love means handing your enemies the one thing that can destroy you. The next morning, they were back on the road until 2 black SUVs blocked their path. Doors opened. Men in dark coats stepped out. Ethan's grip tightened on the wheel. Hold on, don't move. Sophie wrapped her arms around Lila, her pulse racing. One man approached, tapping on the window, a thin smile on his lips. Miss Lawson, we're here to take you home. Ethan fired through the glass. The gunshot cracked through the air. The truck lurched forward, snow spraying as the tires spun. Bullets shattered the side mirror, slicing through the air. Hang on, Ethan shouted. They tore down a narrow forest road, snow swirling wildly behind them. A blast echoed, one of the SUVs erupted in flames. But Ethan didn't slow. At last, they burst from the trees, skidding to a stop by a frozen lake. The truck spun once, then halted. Sophie gasped for breath. Who were they, Ivanov's men? Ethan said grimly. The head of the network Ryan betrayed. Sophie went cold. So they want me to draw him out. Exactly. But they don't know he might have already done that. Ethan opened the trunk and pulled out a small silver bag. Inside was a hard drive. This is what Ryan wanted you to have, he said. He trusted only you to bring it to light. Sophie took it, her hands trembling. But I don't even know what to do with it. You'll know when you reach Montreal. That night, after everyone had fallen asleep, Sophie sat by the dim light of her laptop. Curiosity won. She plugged in the hard drive. Dozens of folders appeared, transactions ledgers, coded files, and one folder named Eden. She opened it. Only one image. Ryan. Standing in the forest snow, glittering on his shoulders, eyes fixed directly on the camera. Beneath it scrawled handwriting barely visible through the frost. If you're seeing this, it means I'm already on my way back. Sophie's hand brushed the screen, tears slipping down her cheeks and pooling in the blue glow of the monitor. She didn't know if he was truly alive or just a memory her heart refused to release. But the moment she whispered his name, that broken heart beat harder, stubborn, defiant, alive. Outside, snow kept falling, and deep within the frozen woods of Vermont, somewhere far from reach, a man with a thin scar along his wrist opened his eyes. He exhaled the cold mist curling from his lips, and his dark gaze gleamed with a familiar fire. She's alive, he murmured. Good. Now it's my turn to come back. Montreal lay beneath a damp gray fog, heavy with the chill of late winter. The streets shimmered with layers of ice neon lights reflecting off the slick pavement like 1,000 shattered mirrors. Sophie sat in the passenger seat of Ethan's car, her eyes distant, watching her faint reflection in the window. Every time they passed a billboard, her ghostly image appeared pale, detached, like a stranger living in her place. It had been over a month since the explosion. Ryan was still gone. No messages, no traces, no proof of life. No one dared to say he was dead, but deep down, Sophie refused to believe he was gone. A man like Ryan didn't vanish. He hid among the very shadows he once ruled. Their temporary home was a small, faded gray house on the edge of Montreal's suburbs, about an hour from the city. Behind it stretched a forest buried under snow. Lila loved it there. She laughed again, painting baking, trying to bring back a sense of normalcy for her sister. But Sophie couldn't. Every morning as sunlight spilled through the window, she still poured a second cup of coffee only to let it grow cold. No one came to drink it. Ethan noticed but said nothing. He spent most of his time at his computer, making encrypted calls to contacts Sophie had never met. Once she entered his room quietly and saw words flashing across the screen. Ivanov. Paris connection active. What's that, she asked. He shut the laptop instantly. Nothing. Just old contacts, he said too evenly. His voice was calm. His eyes were not. For the first time, Sophie saw something flicker behind them, not fear, but hesitation. A shadow. That night, snow fell thickly, and the cabin was quiet except for the crackle of the fire. Sophie sat at the desk, poring over the files Ryan had left behind. Endless rows of numbers, transfers, bank codes, a labyrinth of money and blood. And one name appeared again and again. E. Price. Her breath caught. Ethan Price. Her hands trembled as she opened another file and audio recording. Ryan's voice filled the room, rough and low. Ethan, if this goes wrong, don't let them touch her, no matter what. And another voice replied, deeper. Colder. I promise. But if she finds out everything, you know what I'll have to do. Sophie dropped the headphones, her face pale. Behind her, the door creaked open, and Ethan's voice came softly through the dark. You shouldn't be listening to that. She turned, forcing her voice steady. You and me. That's a quick change in tone. I just want to talk. Ethan walked forward slowly, his hand brushing across the table until it rested beside the hard drive. What did you find? Only proof, she said quietly, that you betrayed Ryan. The words struck the air like ice. Ethan exhaled a soft laugh. Betrayal is what people call survival. Ryan knew I wasn't like him. He had ideals. I had instincts. You're working for Ivanov. Sophie asked, her voice breaking. No, Ethan said, his gaze darkening. I'm working for myself, but Ivanov promised me freedom if I delivered you. Sophie stumbled back, her heartbeat hammering. You're going to hand me over. I don't want to, he said, and his voice carried an ache that sounded almost real. But they already know where you are. I have two choices, take you away before they arrive, or end this now. His tone softened, heavy with something that might have been regret. Sophie's eyes filled with tears. Ryan trusted you. Yes, Ethan whispered. And that was his biggest mistake. A noise outside engines. Headlights cut through the curtains. Ethan turned sharply. They're here. He grabbed her hand. Run! They burst out the back door. Snow swallowing their footsteps. Lila, woken by the chaos, clung to Sophie, terrified. Ethan scooped the girl into his arms. Gunfire cracked through the woods, bullets slicing through tree bark, snow exploding around them. They're going to kill us, Sophie cried. No, Ethan shouted. They just need you. He dragged her toward an abandoned shed buried in snow. Stay here, he ordered, setting Lila down. I'll draw them off. No, don't. That's suicide. Do you have another plan? He crouched in front of her eyes, locking with hers. And in them, Sophie saw not just guilt, but despair. I've done too many wrong things, he said softly. Let me do one right. Before she could react, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to her forehead. Tell Ryan, he whispered, if he's still alive. I kept my promise. Then he turned and ran into the storm, his silhouette swallowed by falling snow. Sophie and Lila huddled inside the shed. Outside, gunfire roared again. The acrid scent of gunpowder crept in through the cracks. Then silence. 1 minute, 2. Footsteps approached. The door swung open. A tall man in a black coat stepped inside, his face carved from stone. Miss Lawson, he said coldly. At last we meet. Sophie backed away, holding Lila tight. Ivanov. No, he said. Just the man finishing what he started. He raised his gun, the black barrel catching the firelight. He was right, you are Cooper's weakness. And weaknesses, he said calmly, should be erased. A gunshot split the air. Sophie shut her eyes, clutching her sister, but instead of pain, she heard metal strike metal. Then another shot. A body hit the ground. She opened her eyes. The man lay motionless in the snow, blood soaking into white. And behind him, Ryan. His coat was burned, his face marked with soot, the scar on his wrist visible beneath the torn sleeve, his eyes cold, steady, alive. Ryan. Her voice broke. You're alive. He stepped closer, his breath visible in the frozen air. I told you, he said quietly. No one touches you. Sophie sobbed and threw herself into his arms. He held her tightly, his hands trembling even as his gaze stayed sharp. "We have to move," he said. "Where's Ethan?" "He went back," she whispered. "To save us." Ryan lowered his head, murmuring. Then he finally did the right thing. Outside, the wind howled through the forest, sweeping snow over the fallen body, covering the blood, erasing the violence of the night. In that small, broken shed beneath the flickering light of dawn, Ryan brushed his thumb against Sophie's cheek, his voice soft, almost like confession. "This time, I'm not running." And though the world outside was still filled with snow and blood in his arms, for the first time in forever, Sophie felt like she was home. Late winter in Montreal was so cold that every breath turned to smoke. Snow fell thick and heavy on the narrow streets, swallowing even the faint yellow glow of the streetlights. In a small wooden cabin deep in the forest, the fire in the hearth flickered weakly, casting shadows on the walls like the unsteady rhythm of a sleeping heart. Sophie sat curled up in a chair, a wool blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. She still couldn't believe it. Ryan was alive. The man she had watched disappear into the flames in Maine now sat only a few feet away, breathing silent, but changed. His eyes were still the same deep brown, yet colder now, the eyes of someone who had crossed the line between life and death and left a part of his soul behind. Ryan was tending to a wound on his arm. He said nothing, simply tightened the bandage with deliberate precision, almost cruelly as though punishing himself. "When did you get hurt?" Sophie asked softly. "On my way back to get you." "You shouldn't have risked your life like that. Do you think I had a choice?" His voice was hoarse, dry as the night wind. He looked up, locking eyes with her. When I heard the gunfire, he said quietly, "I knew if I didn't turn back, I'd lose the only thing that still made me want to live." Her heart twisted. Her lips trembled. "And what's that you?" That night, neither of them slept. Lila had dozed off in the small room while Sophie and Ryan sat by the fire in silence. Sophie told him everything that had happened since the explosion. Ethan, the video on the USB, the unfinished promises. Each time she said Ethan's name, Ryan's expression darkened, but he didn't interrupt. "I knew he would betray me," Ryan said at last. "But I trusted him anyway. Sometimes trust is its own form of penance. You never said why you trusted someone like him." "Because Ethan was once me." Sophie waited quietly. Ryan poured himself a glass of whiskey, his voice dropping low. Part confession, part curse. "Years ago, I worked for Ivanov too. I was the one sent to clean up after traitors. Ethan was just a rookie then. But one day, I was ordered to kill an innocent girl, the lover of a man who tried to escape. I couldn't. I helped her run and... She died a week later," he said, his voice tightening. "By the hand of someone I trusted." Ivanov called it a lesson in compassion. Sophie went still. Now she understood the loneliness in him, the kind that came from loving what only ever burned you in return. "Now that Ivanov knows you're alive," she said softly, "he won't stop. I'm not planning to give him the chance." "What do you mean I'm going to finish what I started?" Fear flickered across her face. "You mean kill him? Not just him," Ryan said, eyes hardening. "The entire network. Once and for all." Sophie grabbed his hand. "You can't fix violence with more violence." Sometimes he murmured, "Only darkness can extinguish darkness." His words made her chest tighten. Ryan's grip softened, his gaze torn between resolve and pain. "I lost everything once because I hesitated," he said quietly. "I can't lose you the same way." Sophie slowly pulled her hand free. "But if you kill him," she whispered, "you'll lose me anyway." The next morning, Ryan was gone. He left only a short note on the table: "I have to meet someone. If I'm not back by sunset, don't wait." Sophie read it over and over, dread sinking deeper each time. She tried to obey, but as hours passed, the silence became unbearable. She grabbed the small gun from Ethan's old duffel bag, threw on her coat, and ran into the snow. She found Ryan near an abandoned dock a few miles from the forest. He was talking to a woman, tall, long brown hair, black leather coat. They stood facing each other in the white landscape like two reflections from a shared past. Sophie hid behind a stack of crates, straining to hear. You really think you can end this? Ryan, the woman asked, her voice both soft and sharp. I don't need to end everything, he replied. Just take back what they stole. Freedom or forgiveness? Both, she laughed quietly. Ivanov will never spare that girl. You know she's just another pawn. Then I'll burn the whole board. The woman stepped closer, her tone chilling. You haven't changed. You couldn't kill me when you had the chance, and now you're making the same mistake with her. And in that moment, Sophie understood. This woman, the innocent girl Ryan once saved, hadn't died. She'd survived. And now she was working for Ivanov. Ryan's voice was calm. Leave before I forget that I owe you anything. No, Ryan, she said softly. This time I'll teach you what compassion costs. She drew her gun. Before she could fire a shot, cracked through the air, grazing Ryan's shoulder. Sophie had stepped out, trembling gun in hand. Stay away from him, Ryan turned sharply. Sophie, what are you doing? Saving you, she said, the way you once saved me. The woman laughed, a chilling sound echoing across the snow. How romantic, she mocked. But you know what they say, the sweetest things die the fastest. She pulled the trigger. Ryan lunged, shoving Sophie to the ground. The gunfire split the air, then silence. The woman fell crimson, blooming across the white snow. Sophie stared, shaking. Ryan's coat was stained red, his breathing ragged. You're hurt. It's nothing, he said through his teeth. Just a scratch. He forced himself to his feet, taking her hand. Now you see, Sophie, he whispered. You can't escape this world by praying. You have to burn it and walk through the ashes. You'll burn with it, she cried. If that's the price of keeping you safe, he said, then so be it. That night they returned to the cabin. Ryan sat by the window watching the snow fall. Sophie wrapped his wound with trembling hands. Where will you go after this? She asked. Somewhere Ivanov can't find me. Will you take me with you if you still want to stay with a man like me? She stopped, meeting his gaze. I don't want a perfect man. Ryan, she said softly. I just want one who still has a heart, even if it's broken. He looked up at her, then their eyes holding until the world seemed to still. For the first time since she met him, Sophie reached out first, her hand brushing his cheek as if touching something fragile and fleeting. And I know, she whispered, you still have one. Ryan smiled faintly, that rare, quiet smile that softened everything in him. He leaned forward, pressing his lips gently to her forehead. You're the most beautiful mistake I've ever made, he murmured, and the only one I never want to fix. Outside, dawn began to break. The last snowflakes melted into light. But peace never lasts. At that moment, Ryan's phone buzzed. A new message appeared from an unknown number. Montreal was just a stop. He's heading to New York, and he's carrying what both of you fear the most. Ryan stared at the screen, his eyes darkening. Sophie touched his shoulder. What is it? Ivanov, Ryan said quietly. He's not dead. And this time, he's coming for us. March in New York carried the taste of salt and metal in its wind, weaving through the glass towers that stretched endlessly into the clouds. The city pulsed like a giant circuit that never shut down, a place where everyone seemed to be running from something, including them. The black car came to a silent stop on the edge of Brooklyn. Ryan turned off the engine and stared through the fogged windshield. Across the street stood an old warehouse, its steel doors sealed shut, no signs, no markings. He stayed quiet for a long moment, as if listening to the heartbeat of his past. Sophie sat beside him, fingers gripping her coat. This is where he's hiding, she whispered. It's where he started, Ryan replied. Ivanov never strays far from the place that reminds him he once had power. She looked at him. His eyes no longer burned with anger, but carried something quieter, deeper, forged of sorrow and steel. Are you sure you want to do this? She asked. After everything, he wasn't just your enemy. He was your mentor. That's exactly why I have to end it myself. The cold wind whipped between them. In that instant, Sophie realized Ryan wasn't the same man who had sat by the fire in Maine. He now carried two opposing truths inside him, the love he had just rediscovered and the sentence he had written for himself. They hid out in a small rented apartment near the Manhattan Bridge. Lila had been sent to safety to stay with an older woman, once Ryan's mother's doctor. At night, the city outside glowed too brightly to sleep. Inside, the yellow lamp cast a soft, trembling light over Sophie's face. Ryan sat at the table, maps and notes spread out before him, lines, names, connections. The light caught the thin scar on his wrist. "You'll kill him," Sophie said quietly, "and then what?" "Then I disappear." "You always say that. Disappear where?" He looked up, voice low but firm. "Somewhere you can't find me." The words hit harder than fear itself. "Why can't you believe you could stay? Because men like me don't belong in peaceful lives. I carry too much darkness." "And me?" "You think I don't?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I have scars you'll never see. Do you think I need light or just someone who stays?" Ryan said nothing. He stepped closer until their breaths mingled in the air. "You're making me want to forget everything," he murmured. "But if I forget, you'll be the one who pays." Tears glimmered in her eyes. "Then promise me," she whispered. "Whatever happens, don't disappear." He brushed his thumb along her cheek. "Promises are easy," he said softly. "Keeping them isn't." The next morning, Ryan got a call. One of Ivanov's men had been caught at the Newark docks. The voice on the line shook. He was transporting something, maybe data from the old network. Or someone Ryan demanded. "Word is, it's a woman, last name Lawson." Ryan froze. "Sophie." But no, she was still here. He spun around and rushed into the room. Sophie was folding clothes, startled by his sudden entrance. "What's wrong?" "They're using you as bait. Someone's impersonating you. For what?" "To make me come out." She went pale then. Realization dawned. "You were never really free of him, were you?" "You just went into hiding." Ryan nodded slightly, his expression a blend of grim defiance and weary pride. "Then it's time to stop hiding." That evening, they reached the warehouse in Brooklyn. The sky was heavy and gray. Cold wind tore through scraps of old newspaper. The iron door creaked open to reveal a cavern of shadows. Ryan went in first, gun in hand. Sophie followed, heart pounding. "You're sure this is where he is?" she whispered. "No," Ryan said, "but it's where he wants me to be." Suddenly, the overhead lights flared on. A voice echoed from above, deep, smooth, and cold as glass. "At last you've come, Ryan Cooper, my most disobedient student. Ivanov." He stood on the upper level, tall and sharp-eyed, his silver hair catching the light. At his feet knelt a woman, blood on her collar, wrists bound. Sophie froze. It was the woman from the photograph in Ryan's USB, the one he'd failed to save. "Anna," Ryan whispered. The woman lifted her head weakly. "You really came." Ivanov smiled. "I keep my promises. She's alive so you could see what mercy costs." Ryan raised his gun. "Let her go." In exchange for what? Ivanov sneered. "Your life or the trembling one behind you?" Sophie clutched Ryan's arm, shaking her head. "Don't, it's a trap." Ivanov laughed. "Smart girl. But too late. The trap isn't just for him, it's for you." The back door burst open. 3 armed men entered, guns aimed. Ryan shoved Sophie aside and fired. Gunshots thundered, echoing through the metal walls. Smoke, blood, screams, then silence. Anna cried out, then went still. Ivanov drew his pistol, aiming straight at Ryan. This time, he said, "No one saves you." A single gunshot cracked the air, but it wasn't his. Ivanov staggered, eyes wide. Blood blossomed across his chest. Behind him stood Sophie, hands shaking, gun smoking. Ryan froze, then rushed to catch her before she collapsed. "What have you done? You've saved me too many times, Ryan," she whispered. "It's my turn." Ivanov felt hatred still flickering behind his dying stare. "You'll never escape him." He rasped, then went still. The warehouse fell silent. Sophie knelt beside Ryan, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You're hurt," she said. "Let me—" "I'm fine," he murmured, voice faint but steady. He's dead. It's over. She shook her head, sobbing harder. No, Ryan, nothing's over. You're still here. And so am I. He smiled, then a soft, fragile smile that didn't belong to a man forged in violence. Remember our promise, he whispered. If I disappear, I'll find you, she said, gripping his hand. Even if I have to chase you to the ends of the earth. His eyes closed, but his fingers held hers tight. 3 hours later, sirens filled the air. Police and paramedics flooded the warehouse. The headlines spread fast. Prime Lord Ivanov. Killed in mysterious shootout. No one mentioned Ryan Cooper. No one knew who pulled the trigger. Sophie sat in the back of an ambulance, the smell of gunpowder still on her hands. Outside, the snow had melted. Dawn glowed pale against the skyline. Far down the street, a man in a dark coat walked against the flow of people, his silhouette swallowed by the city lights. She wanted to call out, but didn't, because deep down she knew men who belong to the shadows can only love by leaving. 2 months later, on a misty morning in Paris, Sophie stepped out of a taxi. In her hand was an unmarked envelope delivered to the hotel where she worked. Inside was a single photograph, a cityscape from high above, and a line written in black ink. I kept my promise. Now it's your turn to live. She smiled through her tears, the ache in her chest no longer sharp. Outside, the city stirred awake, brilliant, loud, alive, and strange. But inside her, there was still one quiet place, a place of wind and fire, and a man who once said, "If you're the light, then burn, even if I'm only the one standing in the dark, watching you." Spring returned to Paris, carrying sunlight as soft as whispers from old souls. The streets glistened with rain, and the wind through the chestnut trees carried the scent of roasted coffee and the faint sound of a violin drifting from a faraway corner. Sophie stood by the 5th-floor window, watching people hurry beneath their bright umbrellas. Her hair stirred in the breeze, and the light brushed her pale skin, making her look like a memory slowly unfolding from a dream. It had been 6 months since that night in New York. Ivanov was dead, his network shattered, and the name Ryan Cooper had vanished from the world, as if he had never existed. No one mentioned him, no one searched for him. But Sophie could not forget. Each morning, while Paris still slept, she brewed 2 cups of coffee, one for herself, one for the man who had gone. She placed his cup by the window and watched the steam rise. In that thin veil of smoke, she sometimes imagined his figure, the dark coat, the distant, gentle eyes. She now worked in a small book and coffee shop on Rue Saint-Honoré, where lovers of literature came seeking a little peace. Every afternoon, she read stories to children, her voice soft as wind through leaves. Sometimes strangers asked, "Your voice sounds sad. Are you waiting for someone?" She smiled faintly. "I'm not waiting for anyone. It's just, someone once promised to come back, and I choose to believe." At night, after closing, she often walked along the Seine, listening to the water lap against the stone. Paris glittered alive, yet to Sophie it all felt like a city wrapped in the haze of memory. One night she stopped on the Pont Neuf Bridge, staring at the reflections of the lamps in the river. She whispered to the wind, "Ryan, if you're still alive, give me a sign. Just one, and I'll know this story isn't over." The wind rose. A small piece of paper skidded across the bridge and touched her foot. She bent to pick it up, an old train ticket faintly printed with Venice. 7:30 a.m. Her heart trembled like a melody that had been paused and suddenly resumed. The next morning, she left Paris. No luggage, no goodbyes, only an old photograph and the ticket. The train sped through sun-washed Italian fields, through tunnels as dark and endless as time itself. Through the window, each burst of light felt like a glimpse of Ryan, that quiet smile, those eyes that once saw her as if the world held no one else. Venice greeted her with the scent of salt and the murmur of water against stone. A city of bridges and red-tiled roofs, a place built to hide those who had lost themselves. She wandered through narrow streets where water lapped at the steps. Each footfall echoed like a call, and inside her longing became a fragile but unyielding light. At a small cafe by the canal, she ordered a bitter espresso. When she looked up, the waiter asked, "Are you Miss Sophie Lawson? Someone left this for you." On the tray lay a black envelope unmarked. She opened it. Inside was a single photograph, a lake surrounded by pine trees, dawn light glinting across its still surface. On the back, written by hand, the place where you first said you weren't afraid anymore. Sophie froze. It was the lake in Maine, the wooden cabin where they once hid where she first saw him truly smile. Her tears fell not from pain, but because her heart had just begun to shine again, all from a single line. 2 days later, she returned to Maine. The snow had melted, the forest was green, and the lake lay calm as glass. The cabin was no longer charred as she remembered someone had rebuilt it. A thin line of smoke curled from the chimney like a message in the wind. She walked slowly to the door and knocked with trembling hands. No answer, just the quiet creak of hinges opening. Ryan stood there, still tall, still solemn, but now he smiled a real smile free of pain. He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "You found the ticket, didn't you? You left it. I couldn't come to Paris, but I knew if anyone would follow the trail, it would be you." Sophie broke down in tears, rushing into his arms. He held her tightly, their breaths mingling the warmth between them, lighting the room like dawn. "Why did you leave without a word?" she asked through her sobs. Ryan brushed her hair, his voice rough but gentle. "I had to clean up what was left. I didn't want to drag you back into it. But I realized no matter how far I go, you're the only ending I want." She looked up into his eyes. This time, "Are you going to disappear again?" He smiled and kissed her forehead. "Only if you tell me to." She shook her head, taking his hand, the one that once felt cold, now warm again. "I used to be afraid of love, Ryan. Now I'm only afraid of losing you again." He drew her closer. Outside, soft rain began to fall, each drop tapping the roof like the heartbeat of a survivor. "It's raining again," she whispered. "Yes," he murmured. "But this time, after the rain, there'll be sunlight." That afternoon, they sat by the lake. Light rippled across the water like memories stirred by the breeze. Ryan held her hand for a long time before speaking. "You know," he said quietly, "people say scars never fade. They just become part of who we are." "And if we learn to love them," she replied, voice barely above a breath, "they stop hurting." He smiled. "Maybe that's why I'm still alive, because I learned to love my pain, and it has your name." She rested her head on his shoulder. The wind through the pines carried the scent of sap-damp earth and new beginnings. For the first time in that silence, Sophie heard no fear inside her, only the rhythm of two hearts beating as one. The sun sank low. Pale gold stretched across the lake like silk. Sophie gazed at it and whispered, "Do you ever think, if you hadn't saved me that night, your life would have been different?" Ryan tightened his grip on her hand. "I don't know what different would look like. I only know that without you, I wouldn't be human anymore." They sat in silence. Every promise, every wound, every regret, all dissolved in that single moment when two lost souls finally found their way home. Outside, the rain eased. A faint rainbow shimmered above the water, a fragile miracle mirrored on the surface. Sophie smiled softly. "At last," she said, "the light has come back." Ryan squeezed her hand. "No," he whispered. "The light never left. It just took me too long to see. It was always in you." When night fell, the cabin by the lake glowed with firelight. Outside, the wind sang a hymn of freedom. Inside, two scarred hearts learned to love again, slowly, gently, like people learning to believe in dawn after endless darkness. And this time, there was no more running. If this story touched your heart, follow the channel and share your thoughts below. Every comment is a spark that helps future stories come alive and reach more hearts.